Coming off the success of its predecessor, X-Men Apocalypse had the potential to wrap up the first-class trilogy on a high note, especially with a talented director like Bryan Singer taking the reins of his fourth X-Men film. Everything looked well, and then I watched the movie, and let's just say it was an unfortunate disaster. Of course, to be blatantly honest, it's not X-Men Origins bad, it's just hard to dislike a film with so many moments of magic and potential. However, at the end of it, it was just one big bloody mess built for the sake of tying in with the Dark Phoenix storyline coming out in theaters real soon. Oh boy, I'm kinda worried about that one. Every single month there always seems to be a new problem that starts to arise with that film, and for the first time, I'm not even looking forward to an X-Men sequel. As a huge fan of this franchise, it was quite disappointing to see so many great characters wasted for the sake of a very generic plot.
Pretty world. I can't wait until it's all mine. I'm considering nothing less than world domination.
Instead of focusing on the core story of what the X-Men films have always stood for, it was replaced for another corny end-of-the-world scenario that makes me just wanna fucking... I remember a time when movies didn't involve so much politics and instead focused on investing storylines and strong characters, but nowadays we have people like Rian Johnson or Dumb and Dumber constantly ruining characters and subverting our expectations in all the wrong ways possible. There was even a massive outroar by a group of people regarding the poster of Apocalypse choking on Mystique, claiming the film supported violence against women. These are the kind of people that can't separate fiction from reality and always finding a way to whine and complain about something in a film that doesn't touch on the technicality but instead of how it treats its female or POC characters. And of course, one of the stupidest articles I've read so far is about how someone got offended by Fat Thor. There were even people upset about how Game of Thrones killed off the Dothrakis and Missandei as they were a diverse group of individuals, but let's be honest for a second here, right? They were side characters that nobody gave a shit about, and Missandei is pretty much as useless as her mass murdering best friend Daenerys. Instead of critiquing the construction of the film or TV show itself, these select few morons opt to rage on Twitter about fictional problems that fictional characters face instead of tackling real world problems. And there are people out there that need your help, so if you really want to make a change, then I suggest getting off Twitter and actually aiding these people in need. I couldn't help but feel some sort of injustice was done to everything that was built up in the X-Men universe, and it was only about time that I made this review. X-Men Apocalypse consists of poor character choices and motivations, a very stale first half, retconning a few things from the previous films, as well as an awful execution with the portrayal of Apocalypse. Everything about him is just the definition of wrong. This guy has every power known to mutant kind, like fucking wall rebuilding powers, almost like Superman from Quest for Peace. And not to mention his costume giving power. You've made him into a fucking tailor. Okay?
You have an eye for animals, Lois. This horse is brain damaged. That's why I got it so cheap.
But the only power that he just so happens to not have is being a telepathic just so we have a plot. And trust me, I will get into this while I'm dissecting the entire film. I'm gonna shit all over Apocalypse through this entire review cause everything about him is just so fucking awful. So if you thought he was the bright spot of the film, well, you're gonna hate me then. So this is how the review is gonna go down. I'm gonna dive into the plot from start to finish. I'm gonna be pointing out every single thing that stands out, whether it's bad or good. So just be prepared because this might be a long review. I really do care about this franchise and I need to take my time to explain why I feel like this was a missed opportunity in hopes of a very solid film, as well as giving a few critical suggestions along the way. I want to apologize in advance as you may find my review a bit jumpy, but that's not my fault cause bloody hell, in the first 30 minutes or so we jump from scene to scene, from location to location, so many bloody times that you're probably going to be lost at some point. But don't worry, I'll keep you in the loop as best as I can. So if you're ready, let's get a move on then. We open with a typical monologue from Professor X as we're brought through the vast land of the Nile Valley from way back in time. The people seem to be worshipping someone by the name of Evan Sabano, who is revealed to be the first ever mutant alongside his 4 horsemen. Apocalypse is looking a bit old and weary and proceeds with a ritual to transfer his power and consciousness to a much younger and able body. As the transference is occurring, a few guards decide to betray him and attempts to disrupt the ritual. They're taken out by the horsemen, however everything around them starts falling apart as the ritual seems to be completed just in time. However, Apocalypse falls into an endless hole alongside his remaining mutant follower. A last gasp effort shows a barrier conjured around Apocalypse to protect her master from the falling boulders and rubble. Ohio 1983. 10 years after the events of Days of Future Past, we see a teacher doing a little presentation on the so-called discovery of mutants back in DC. We get a first glimpse of young Scott Summers having some problems with his eyes, only to be harassed by a bully. He heads to the bathroom only to discover his gift of mass destruction while taking out the bully unintentionally. We quickly cut to Berlin and see Jennifer Lawrence heading into a fight club. Yeah, so here's the thing, right? She barely feels like Mystique in this entire film cause she's pretty much in Jennifer Lawrence form for a good chunk of the runtime. But I'll get into that issue a little later on with more details. She notices Nightcrawler in the cage taking on Angel and attempts to free him. Oof, nice uppercut. Nightcrawler and not Mystique manages to escape.
Let's get out of here.
We cut to another location yet again, and this is where my problems start to arise. There are so many bloody cuts and jumps in the first 30 minutes or so that it really just made me lose focus and barely invested me in the storytelling. I understand that you have to set up so many characters as quickly as you can, but there's always a much cleverer way to do that. After the events from Days of Future Past, after the strong-willed fight of Magneto with the intentions of liberating the mutants from the potential reckoning of humankind upon them, we see Eric working in a factory in Poland, living a pretty normal life. He has a wife and a daughter that he loves, and we get a good little character moment between himself and his daughter. This is a great setup for that necessary emotional impact later on. We cut to the Summers taking a trip to the mansion as they run into the new Jean Grey. Professor is interrupted by Havoc and Scott and proceeds to show him around the mansion and persuades Cyclops to a simple demonstration of his power. He then absolutely decimates the Professor's favorite tree, which his grandfather planted when he was 5, and to his surprise, Scott gets enrolled into the school for the gifted. Hold on for just a second, right? Before I go on, I want to discuss something real quick. Scott's laser beam power, or whatever you want to call it, how does it exactly work? Because we've just seen him decimate a tree in this film, but in a couple of the original X-Men movies, all the laser did was push back the people he was hitting instead of cutting them to half. It's the weird inconsistencies like this that I notice in a ton of comic book movies that sometimes really takes me out of it. This is one of the reasons why some people can't take them seriously, and I totally understand that. Sometimes you've got to close one eye or take these films with a grain of salt, I guess, but I fucking won't. I'm gonna constantly point it out till someone shows me true balance. Cairo, Egypt. We see a mysterious woman in a hijab lurking around and beats up some guy covering up a mysterious place buried underground. It's Moira, yep, the person that caused the Professor's disability. She is back, and don't worry, she's just as useless as she was in First Class. She further explores the tunnel and sees a few Egyptians chanting Evan Savno as we first saw in the opening scene. The pyramid lights up only for Apocalypse to regain consciousness after centuries of a wonderful beauty sleep. Here's the big question, right? If this random cult knew about the story of Evan Sahno, perhaps one of the most told tales in Egypt, whether they were to believe it or not, don't you think some sort of special forces or the government would have tried and searched across these ancient monuments to perhaps discover if this god-like being truly existed? Am I looking too deep into this, or should I just accept that a random cult found him before the government did? I think the existence of this review should answer that question. As he awoke from his beauty sleeps, shockwaves and tremors are released across the planet, strong enough to detach a heavy metal container carrying boiling liquid metal. Eric is then forced to do the right thing, and in the process costed him to reveal his powers. The workers give him a cold look, knowing full well that they're in the presence of a mutant. Back at the mansion, Jean is having troubles in her sleep as Charles tries to calm her down by entering the mine only to see destruction and a glimpse of the apocalypse. Jean is convinced that it was all real, but Professor says otherwise. She does hint us of the Phoenix, as she did mention a power like fire growing inside of her. Beast and Charles head to Cerebro after feeling the tremors that reach the mansion. He sees Moira, the woman that he's clearly still into, and insinuates that he wants to head over to Egypt to get further details. Eric and his family are forced to pack up and get away as soon as possible, fearing his workers might have reported him, and soon realizes his daughter is missing. He heads into the woods alongside his wife, only to be stunned at the sight of authorities keeping hold of their daughter. The authorities make it clear that they know who exactly Eric is and made a clever decision not to bring along any metal belongings, and proceeds to show him a piece of tattered newspaper with the image of Magneto at DC. Distraught and knowing the outcome if he were to rebel, he decides to turn himself in. His daughter, however, starts screaming and crying for her father, and we find out that she has powers as well. Panicked and alarmed by what's going on with the birds in the forest, one of the authority figures accidentally fires an arrow, piercing through both mother and daughter. One blow to kill off everything he ever cared about. One blow to destroy his entire character arc, giving way for his old enraged self to emerge once again. As he mourns the loss of his daughter, he grabs her metallic necklace to clean up the mess. This is definitely one of the most impactful scenes in the entire X-Men universe, with the way it was shot, the color palette that was used, as well as the suitable score accompanied by Fassbender's fantastic performance. As I said, this film has its moments and he just continues to prove why he's the best character in this universe, but it's frustrating that it will all go to ruins real soon. Because plot. Apocalypse steps out into the real world, slightly confused with the modern changes, and notices Storm stealing from a vendor. She runs away only to be surrounded by some angry men. Apocalypse then confronts them and immediately asks the question, who rules the world? They start insulting him, calling him a clown and stuff, and this pisses off Apocalypse. He uses sand to behead a few people and traps a guy in a wall. We cut to CIA headquarters. Professor X and Havoc heads in to have a chat with Moira. The conversation and dialogue between Charles and Moira is quite hilarious actually, as he stumbles upon his words, talking to his love interest, as she's oblivious to it after her memory was wiped in first class.
It's wonderful to see you again, to meet you again for the first time. You've got a son?
Yes.
She goes on to explain about a certain cult searching ancient sites for this powerful god being that is always followed by the four horsemen, creating chaos across every one of their reigns. Storm brings Apocalypse to her home, I think, I don't know, but we see a little picture of Mystique on the wall, and Storm claims that she looks up to her as a hero that did the right thing in hopes that the humans will look at mutants as equals rather than dangerous beings. So Apocalypse continues with his quite ridiculous powers, where he touches the TV and instantly learns the entire history of planet Earth and picks up the English language as well. Fuck me. He then delivers the most cliched, generic villain bad guy line of how this world needs to be cleansed.
This world needs to be vomit.
And yes, he does say this like a billion more times later in the film, just in different constructions and arrangements of sentences. You know, compared to the comics, I just think he looks awful here, and yes, I appreciate the makeup and stuff rather than full CGI, but look at Thanos. One of the greatest villains in the history of comic book movies, because he was so well written, so well fleshed out, and he had a purpose that made sense. In a way, you could almost see him as the good guy because he has some honor despite wiping out half the universe. So a little bit of endgame spoilers coming up, but fuck it, right? Pretty sure everyone's seen it by now, but if you haven't, then I don't know what you're doing with your life. But anyways, Thanos literally had all the Infinity Stones at his disposal. That is ultimate power right at the palm of his hands, but after his purpose was fulfilled, he intentionally did a very noble thing of destroying the stones, just like Uncle Ben said.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Thanos showed that he is a fucking honorable villain. Apocalypse just misuses his powers like some irresponsible teenager in order to cleanse the world. Ugh, what fucking garbage motivation. Storm implies that he can't go around killing people and proceeds to give her more power cause he can do that, I guess, and in the process turns her hair white. That's how her hair turned white. Why am I so worked up about Storm's hair changing color? I don't know, because it's stupid the way it happened, but clearly not as stupid as how Nick Fury lost his eye.
Those bad guys still in there somewhere. Oh, mother!
A fucking cat. Go home, Captain Marvel, you're fucking trash.
You absolute plank!
Yet another fucking jump, and this time we focus on not Mystique seeking a safe passageway for Nightcrawler as she negotiates with Caliban. Caliban? Ah, fuck it, I'm just gonna call him Caliban. We see good old Psylocke in the background as Caliban tells Mystique about what happened to Eric and his family. We then cut to the mansion where Beast hands over specially crafted sunglasses for Scott in order to contain his power, and he sees Jean for the first time and they have a little chat. Jean lets him know that they're both alike as neither one of them has complete control over their powers. Not Mystique returns to the mansion and bumps into Beast, looking a bit awkward. Storm and Apocalypse teleports to Psylocke and Caliban in hope of finding more mutants to join their little crew. Apocalypse disintegrates a gun pulled out by Caliban and utters more nonsense, almost making me want to fucking drink to death. But sadly, the show must go on. He then convinces Psylocke to join him and she just agrees. Yeah, just like that. Cause Apocalypse promised her freedom. Why would she even trust him? He's just some random bluish purplish dude with a weird fetish of cleansing the earth, and quite frankly he always seems to be changing shades in different scenes, so I don't even have a definitive answer as to what color he is, or am I just colorblind? Nah, if I was colorblind, I wouldn't be able to see how stupid Apocalypse truly looks here. So Psylocke brings Apocalypse to Warren, and yeah, he's just as idiotic and one note as Psylocke is. Aside from costume building powers, he can turn feathers into metal. Isn't that like an awful idea, cause it must be heavy as fuck to be flapping around your 1,000-pound wings? Nah, who gives a shit about logic? He can at least throw his metallic feathers that now acts as knives. We then jump back to the mansion and see Beast showing not Mystique around the underground lair, which is of course located under the basketball court. We still haven't seen the real Mystique up to this point, and I don't know if this was true or not, but according to sources, she wasn't comfortable with the whole blue makeup and being naked. But here's the big question. Why would you cast someone who's uncomfortable playing the role of Mystique? I mean, Jennifer Lawrence is one of the most talented actresses out there, but you can't cast her in a role like this just because of her amazing credits. Not to mention that the story over the course of 3 movies has a huge focus on her as well. Rebecca Romijn, who played Mystique in the original trilogy, was pretty much Mystique 90% of the time, unless she had to transform to full enemies or get into discreet places. But other than that, she's Mystique. It's dedication like that from an actress that I can really appreciate. You know, Jennifer Lawrence does a great job in a role, but she just doesn't feel like my Mystique at times. You could of course make the counter argument about how she's in human form because she wants to hide from the humans, but she's in the mansion right now. Why would she hide her true self? Makes no sense, does it? We jump back to Eric as he heads into his workplace to confront his workers that ratted him out to the authorities. Enraged and in agony of his loss, he tells the workers to think about the people they love the most before unleashing his deadly wrath on them. Once again, Fassbender just steals the show, but then Apocalypse shows up and spoils the party.
Who the fuck are you?
shit.
Yeah, shit. Fucking right as shit.
He proceeds to kill the whole lot himself, as he's just a baddie bad guy that kills off people for no reason, absolutely abusing his godlike powers. He convinces Magneto to join the cause, and this is where the film completely lost me. My favorite character, the most well done and well written character in this franchise, is ruined. He just fucking joins the Horsemen to be Apocalypse's bitch. Yeah, sure, he lost his family and is pissed at the humans, but it's not in his character to follow a blind leader in a path of destruction. Magneto has always been the leader and isn't some follower that takes orders from above. He gets shit done in his own way on his own terms, as we've seen countless times across the previous 5 films. Oh, by the way, look at this shot right here. He's pretty much the same height as Magneto, the most powerful mutant, a god-like creature, stands physically equal to Magneto. Movie technology today should have been sufficient to at least make him 7 or 8 feet tall. Just give him that sort of massive figure so that he can at least look intimidating, even though the things that are coming out of his mouth is utter nonsense. Apocalypse takes Eric back to the place where he lost his mother, as we saw in the original X-Men as well as First Class. He then tells Magneto to use his power, and because he's enraged by the horrible memories of this place, he starts pulling out every metallic mineral in the area and rains utter destruction. Here's my question, right? If Apocalypse isn't telepathic, how the fuck does he know about Magneto's past? Once again, the inconsistency is quite moronic. A major plot point revolves around Apocalypse taking Professor X's telepathic power. So how is it that he's read Magneto's mind? It's just the little things like this that just frustrates the shit out of me. We cut to Quicksilver watching the 10-year anniversary of the events and tells his mom that he has intentions to find his father. Now remember this little subplot. It's supposed to tie in with the third act of the film, but for some reason they just chose to toss it aside. I'll get into more details when we reach that scene itself. So Professor X and Havoc brings Moira back to the mansion, and at the same point in time we cut to Jean, Scott, Nightcrawler and Jubilation. Not exactly sure why Jubilation was slightly focused on when she doesn't use her powers once or even help the X-Men during the climax. Maybe we'll see more from her in the Dark Phoenix film, who knows. So looks like they've just gotten out from the Return of the Jedi, and Jean pretty much sums up the X-Men universe with this line.
Well, at least we can all agree the third one's always the worst.
This of course doesn't apply to the Wolverine trilogy, cause Logan was fucking awesome, and if you don't agree with me then you're just bloody wrong. Professor X and not Mystique run into each other and have a little chat, with the Professor expressing his hopes of turning the mansion into a campus for mutants and humans to live and learn together one day. The Professor is confident that there is always a way to be seen as equals alongside the humans, but they soon start to butt heads a little when Not Mystique reminds him of his naiveness. Even after the events of 73, the humans still look at mutants the same way, only this time with a little more respect. Not Mystique finally reveals the tragedy that recently struck his old friend Eric, as the Professor proceeds to Cerebro in hopes of connecting with him. We then see Apocalypse using his best abilities, suit reformation powers, and every time I see this bloody stupid thing on screen, I can't help but laugh. Charles connects with Magneto's mind only for him to be told off, and Eric expresses how he wants to take everything away from humans as they did the same to him, and in the background you can see Apocalypse giving Angel some makeup? What? Apocalypse then takes this opportunity to show Professor X a glimpse of the devastating chaos that's coming. He then controls the Professor to get into the mind of militants all over the world and fire every single nuke. The first time around when I saw this movie in cinemas, I was convinced Apocalypse was going to nuke the planet to hell and just show us he means business, but turns out he just fires them into space for them to float around so the humans can't use them. If you were gonna cleanse this planet, maybe using a couple of the nukes wouldn't be such a bad idea, as you did establish early on in the film that you just kill people for fun. But I guess because plot, we're just gonna have to go along with this. Apocalypse and his little posse teleports to the mansion and kidnaps the Professor. Havoc tries to stop them by firing his laser, only to hit some sort of reactor. Just when you think everyone's about to die, we see Quicksilver come into the picture to give us another bloody good scene, somehow topping the one from Days of Future Past. Very well constructed, with a good amount of humor and a suitable choice of music to accompany it. Quite convenient as well for Quicksilver to show up at just the right time, otherwise we would have seen mutant kids burned alive. Not a good sight at all. The mansion gets blown to hell, and in the process we finally get to see Mystique. Beast is happy to see Raven in her true form and tells her that the kids look up to her. Jean and the others get back from their little field trip only to realize the mansion is fucked. Scott asks where's his brother and soon realizes he wasn't saved in time as he was closest to the blast. God, why did they have to kill Havoc? He was awesome with tons of potential, especially with Lucas still doing a great job of portraying him. A couple of helicopters then conveniently shows up claiming to have medical assistance. Militants get out of the helicopter and we see William Stryker, looking like the piece of shit he is, approaching the mutants. Mystique quickly realizes it and starts to panic as Stryker's team shoots some form of shockwave, knocking out all the mutants. He picks a few of the main characters to be taken as we see Nightcrawler, Jean and Scott successfully hiding themselves amidst the rubble. Nightcrawler teleports into the chopper in an attempt to save everyone but is unable to use his powers. Jean struggles as well and realizes the cage is some form of power dampening enclosure. Is this like the one in X-Men Origins? I guess so. Scott mourns the loss of his brother and is consoled by Jean as Nightcrawler starts to pray. You know, I can't help but feel that this entire scene is just filler. There was no point in time during the movie where we saw William Stryker planning an attack on the mansion, and not to forget that he never knew this place even existed right up to the year 2003. Cause if you remember in X-Men 2, he infiltrated the mansion for the first time then. He's never done so before, even if he has tracked down the place with his satellites. Am I missing something here? Because it seems like Bryan Singer is retconning the events of his own film. Then again, the X-Men universe is pretty confusing, but I think I've gotten a pretty good idea on how all the movies are arranged coherently. This entire scene feels shoehorned in just so we can see Weapon X. Wolverine nor William ties in with the core story, and it's a definitive conclusion that this was done to extend the runtime while Apocalypse has some time to do his villainy things. Even if Stryker mentioned later on that they detected the source that was firing the missiles was coming from the mansion, if we were to follow the timeline correctly, he did not go to the mansion right up to the year 2003 as I said before. Yeah, so I'm probably going a little bit off track here, so let's just get back to the film. Charles tries to convince Eric that there's more to him than just destruction, but Magneto would not give in because the plot says so. William Stryker forces the imprisoned X-Men to tell him where the Professor is, but they try to convince him that there's a more powerful mutant out there causing the chaos, but William just shrugs off their statement and leaves. Apocalypse utters more nonsense and forces the Professor to deliver a message to everyone on the planet about his mental fetish of cleansing the Earth. Quicksilver and Mystique have a little chat about Magneto and he tells her the truth as she replies with,
What?
The Professor then acts as a messenger to deliver Mr. Bad Guy's message, like what Voldemort did back in Deathly Hallows. Nightcrawler and the others teleport into some sort of generator room only to hear some loud growling. Scott questions Jean if it's some sort of animal trapped only for her to say no. She opens up the enclosure and fucking Weapon X comes out. Okay, so somehow they had to have Logan here, and I'm down with a little fan service, right? But I'm not sure why critics are such tight asses about fan service. Like, bitch, calm the fuck down. As much as a movie is made for normies, it's only right that the writers include at least one scene that longtime fans can appreciate in return for our support for all these years. Weapon X goes absolutely berserk on the guards, and I can appreciate that we get to see some blood splattered around and just showing us shades of Logan that of course came out the following year. The part gets cleared for them as Jean helps Logan remove the metal thingy on his head. Jean gives him back fragments of his memory as he runs off into the snow. Scott blasts open the door to free the X-Men while Stryker escapes in his chopper after his project got loose. I mean, every time Mr. Bad Guy is on screen, I just get a little worried. He proceeds to turn buildings and everything around him into sand and builds a gigantic pyramid, almost like the one we saw in the opening scene. Mr. Bad Guy reconstructs Magneto's helmet out of sand because he can do that? What the fuck? You're telling me that all this time Magneto was using the sand helmet in the original X-Men trilogy? Shouldn't that thing have been disintegrated when Apocalypse got annihilated at the end of the film? Then again, it is a comic book movie, right? So I guess the writers were just gonna assume that we're gonna take things with a grain of salt Except I can't. Just seeing Moira piloting the plane makes me wonder why they would bring a normal human being into a lethal fight and potential war with very powerful mutants that can disintegrate you in a second or slice you in half, and there is nothing Moira can do about it. And as I said, she's a pretty much useless character that's only used for the professor's love interest, and they had to find something for her to do, so they made her a pilot, just like in First Class. Unlike in Days of Future Past, at least this time they were smart enough to bring along Quicksilver, as he can do some serious damage with his blistering pace. Well, that's what we all thought was gonna happen, but we'll get to that a little later on, right? Magneto starts pulling out every metallic object in the area, creating some mass destruction, and forms a magnetic field around him, as well as the entire planet. Apocalypse actually took the time to build statues of himself and the Horsemen. That's cute. The X-Men head straight into the chaos, and so the giant CGI green screen battle ensues. But to be fair, the visuals for the most part actually look really good. So as I said, there are moments to enjoy, but the overwhelming mess isn't enough to save the movie. Jean realizes that Apocalypse wishes to do his ritual with the Professor to gain his telepathic powers, and while that's happening, the rest of the X-Men takes on the 4 Horsemen. No, actually 3, cause Magneto's just chilling in his magnetic bubble. I don't get it, why can't Apocalypse just turn the rest of the X-Men into sand? I mean, he's so powerful and has every single mutant ability known to mankind. Sorry, mutant kind, but doesn't use his brain to think when it's needed the most. Fucking mental. Of course your stupid transference or whatever the hell you're gonna call it is gonna get interrupted, you stupid twat. Hey, Apocalypse, now might be a really good time to utilize those overpowered abilities, but I guess not. Because plot. There's the argument, of course, that he wouldn't want to kill his own kind, but his stupid transference itself is gonna kill the Professor, so that potential debate is definitely off the table. Nightcrawler attempts to find the Professor, but is soon interrupted by Metal Wing Guy, and they have their own little fight. Mystique and Quicksilver confronts Magneto as they try and convince him to stop. Quicksilver then struggles to tell the truth, and that plotline just comes to a halt. You do realize that the whole premise of Quicksilver coming along this journey was to find his father and get him back, but stumbled at the very last second. He literally went to the mansion earlier on in the film to see if Magneto was there. His intentions and purpose of getting back his father unintentionally led him to save everyone at the mansion. This could have been the most solid driving point for Magneto to stop what he was doing. But I guess since Mystique is the main focus here, she was the one to convince him in the end. The battle ensues between both parties as we see the poor Michelin Man get lasered, and while that's going on, Apocalypse continues with his transference as the Professor loses his hair and, becomes the iconic Professor as we all know him. Nightcrawler manages to shrug off Angel for the moment as he barely saves the Professor and teleports him back to the plane. Apocalypse then throws a tantrum as if his mom just took away his controller so he can't play Fortnite anymore, and we have this very weird scene of CGI Psylocke running. Just looks awful. She manages to crash the plane they were about to escape on with the help of Angel, but luckily for the X-Men, Nightcrawler manages to teleport them out of harm's way, and in the process uses up all his energy. Magneto has a little flashback scene sort of recalling his more positive moments with Charles, how his old friend aided him in a time of need and essentially helped him to become a better man. Quicksilver finally steps into the picture, and this is what we all expected him to, just beat the shit out of Apocalypse. But of course, Apocalypse has his own speed ice power and takes down Quicksilver alongside breaking a few bones. Psylocke approaches Apocalypse with his grasp firmly on Quicksilver. She is told to finish the job, but in an unexpected twist, slashes the bad guy's throat and reveals herself to be Mystique. Now wait just a fucking minute. I get it, you're Mystique. You can transform into anyone you want, including the clothes they're wearing as well. That has clearly been established. But now you can somehow morph Psylocke's sword as well? No, you can't do that. And when I said there were major inconsistencies throughout this mess, I meant it, and here's the blatant proof. Apocalypse calls out for the Professor as he chokes on Mystique, and without wasting any more time, the Professor decides to take the fight to him. He gets into the mind of Apocalypse and has a little force battle with him, and the reason I call it a force battle is because it's pretty much a battle that wouldn't have any physical consequences for both parties, just like The Last Jedi, except I preferred this one as it makes more sense since the Professor can't outright go face to face with Apocalypse in reality and just start throwing punches. Luke on the other hand could have easily taken on Kylo, but we shall not question the genius of Rian Johnson and his fetish of subverting our expectations. As they continue their force battle, I want you to look at this image right here. If they made Apocalypse this huge, at least he would have been slightly intimidating, but quite frankly still wouldn't be able to save his shit writing, so whatever. The professor gets beaten down and is absolutely helpless at this point, but Magneto shows up and blocks him with an X. Ah, X for X-Men, right? Just like what Wolfie did back in X-Men Origins. That literally made no sense, because a normal person would have at least drew a circle or something, or maybe a square, or even a fucking triangle, but an X? Okay. Magneto does his best to hold back Apocalypse as Scott aids him, but Apocalypse's magical force field seems to be as strong as ever. Professor X, bloodied and battered, calls out for Jean to help. Everyone else is doing what they can to take down the menace inside, while Moira just stands there and shows us how useless she is. The professor finally tells Jean to release the power within her. The Phoenix comes out and destroys the barrier protecting Apocalypse as everyone else uses their given abilities to help the cause, and we see Storm helping out as well after realizing her hero that she looked up to was in trouble. Apocalypse finally gets annihilated, and that's that. The finale is cool and all, but it's just a showcase of how overpowered these mutants are. There was no smart strategy to take down the bad guy. It's just a matter of being who could blast lasers or throw metal objects, and really reminds me of Captain Marvel. But at least these characters are likable and all around 10 times the film Captain Marvel will ever be. Not to mention that the cast of X-Men itself are super talented people, unlike this plank. This is also the most extravagant finale in any of the X-Men films. Unlike the rest of them, they relied on solid storytelling that invested us all the way in the process, giving us a great payoff towards the end. Even in The Last Stand, as bad as it was, I was invested in the story. They finally found a cure for mutants. Magneto doesn't like the idea and decides to take out the source, which eventually leads to a war. And at the same time, Wolverine attempts to save Jean, the woman he loves. So much on the line, a good amount of suspense, and most importantly, a villain that has a grounded motivation for his actions. It all wraps up with a clever strategy being used. Beast comes from behind to inject the cure into Magneto, and Wolverine stays behind to kill off Jean. Alright, let's make a little comparison with one of the stronger X-Men films, Days of Future Past. One of the biggest reasons why that movie worked so well was due to such a matured story of how we should always strive to be a better person, even if we had the abilities to annihilate our enemies. This is of course aided with characters that made decisions with a sense of rationality and never broke their traits for the sake of the plot. Alright, back to the story. Everyone surrounds the professor to check on his condition, and he proceeds to give Moira back her memories. Everything is back to the way it should be. Jean and Magneto helps to rebuild the mansion as Quicksilver tells Storm he might just tell Magneto the truth one day. In the background, we see the X-Men standing in line as the professor and Magneto have a little chat on their futures. Eric says his goodbyes to his old friend, and we notice that Mystique is taking charge of the X-Men, and from the shadows, the Sentinels somehow appear after getting destroyed in Days of Future Past, and the end. It's quite ironic how they had the audacity to name the film after its weakest element, and I know I've been shitting a lot on Apocalypse, but I've clearly stated my valid and reasonable critiques throughout the review. There was a time when superhero films were kinda shaky, slowly finding their way, and almost no one could take them seriously. And then the original X-Men came along and changed the way comic book movies are adapted today. And I am quite grateful that so many fantastic filmmakers out there are putting in so much love and care into these source materials and crafted masterpieces like the Dark Knight trilogy, the original Spider-Man films, not the third one, Avengers Infinity War, Endgame, as well as Wonder Woman if we can sort of ignore the final 10 minutes. And it's comic book movies like these that help this genre of films grow so much to the point where they're starting to get nominated in the Academy Awards and really are taken seriously by critics. You know, as much as I shat on this film, I have my reasons for it. I'm almost like a parent that cares about his child. If he or she is not behaving and sort of acting out, as a responsible parent, I would have to scold my child because I want him or her to be better. It's just the same application to films. I can be hard on them, but at the end of the day, I just want them to improve because I know they can. Despite being a film that I could still rewatch and enjoy, especially since it has a decent amount of humor sprinkled throughout, great visuals as well as excellent performances from a select few actors, the weak plot point, the inconsistencies when it comes to the powers as well as the villain really made this into an unfortunate disaster. I reckon that somehow Dark Phoenix will be worse than this since they faced a ton of production problems with it, but we'll just have to see. Once again, I'm sorry if this review might have been a little too long, but I really do care about this franchise and wanted to analyze every aspect of it properly before giving it a final verdict. Expect a similar in-depth review for The Last Jedi coming real soon, and trust me, I'm gonna be 10 times more brutal in that one compared to this, just because of how bad it is. If you guys enjoyed this review, hope you all can support the channel by hitting that subscribe button, and most importantly, leave your comments and thoughts about X-Men Apocalypse down below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Ciao.